Welcome to another episode of Relatively Famous, the podcast where all of our guests are relatives of famous people, hence Relatively Famous. My famous relative is Vanna White of Wheel of Fortune. I'm Chip White, her brother, obviously. Today's guest I'm super excited about because her aunt is one of my favorite Hollywood celebrities. She's known as Elvira, or Cassandra Peterson is her real name. And today our guest is Paige Glaves.
Relatively Famous podcast with Chip White.
Welcome, Paige. It's nice to meet you, and so excited to have you as a guest on Relatively Famous.
Thank you so much, Chip. I'm really excited to be here, too.
Now, we've never met, other than talking kind of a few times on the phone and a few texts back and forth. And like I said, your aunt is one of my favorite people. When I first moved out to Hollywood in the 80s, I became a limo driver for a guy named Ralph Caracosa, who had these 80s Cadillac stretch limos. And Cassandra was one of his clients, and I got to drive her a lot. She actually became kind of a friend. She would invite me to some fun stuff, to the premiere of her movie, and whenever she would see me, she'd go like, "Hey, Chip," you know. It was like, so I love your aunt. So I'm super excited you're a guest today, and kind of fill us in about who you are and what your relationship with Cassandra's like.
All right. Well, I absolutely echo everything you just said. She's one of my favorite people, too. And it's entirely possible that you and I met at some point in the 80s, because I know I've met your sister on a couple of different occasions. And Cassandra used to take me with her. Anytime I was out visiting in the summer, I would go with her to whatever event or, premiere or shoot, filming it was. And I met a lot of really cool people. So Cassandra is my mom's oldest sister, and there's three sisters. And I was pretty young when I first started to understand that she was a celebrity. So I've always had Elvira. Aunt Elvira was always a part of my life, and gosh, she became Elvira before I was even born. I was born in the, late, early 80s. And no, I don't mind sharing. I was born in 84, and I think Elvira became what it was in 82. So it's always been a part of my life. And yeah, I knew right away that she was famous or a celebrity, and I think it meant more to me in a way because I was so removed from that whole world and living in Florida, and my family were like lower middle class. We didn't have a lot of money, and celebrity is a really big deal. When you've lived out in LA for a long time, you see celebrities all the time, and it becomes sort of not as big of a deal. But I think when you're living in Central Florida and you're a little kid, especially in the 80s, it's a big deal. So for me as a child, to know that I had a famous aunt was such a cool thing. It took me a while to even get over the excitement of it and be a fangirl myself. But once I got to know her better and our relationship became closer, I think that, she just became my aunt. She wasn't Aunt Elvira anymore. She was Aunt Cassandra, which is the way it should be with an aunt and a niece. But it took a while because to me, she was a celebrity even as a kid.
Yeah, and she was kind of she still is this persona of Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And even though she's got amazing acting credits as Cassandra, I knew her at first as Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And I first moved to LA, I remember like, who is this late night horror show person, and it was so cool that I got to be friends with her. I know you mentioned that in one of our previous conversations that at 13 you went to live with Cassandra. Tell us a little bit about that relationship and kind of what it's like today.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned previously, Cassandra used to fly me out to LA almost every summer. So I would get on a plane by myself since I was, I think, 7 years old and fly to LA every single summer to spend, how a summer felt like an eternity as a little kid, but I'm sure it was about a month probably. So I literally was going from like the trailer park in Florida to the Hollywood Hills. And I looked forward to those summers like nothing else in my life. Just having that time in this different world was really important. And it showed me that there were things outside of the literal trailer park in Central Florida. So, um, we became close through the summers, but my home life in Florida was not very good. It was it was rough. I have two alcoholic parents. There was abuse, physical and mental abuse going on, and by about 13 I was rebelling in a big way. I was taking off, running away from home, smoking cigarettes, hanging out with older kids. I was on a path to go in a real bad direction. And Cassandra stepped in, and she knew that my mom wasn't really capable of taking care of me anymore, and my dad was in a bad place as well, and she yanked me out of Florida and took custody of me. And she helped me get back on the right path. So I went to live with her family for a little while. She had me go off to a therapeutic course for a little bit to kind of get my head on straight after being the wild child in the trailer park, which I understand, to have this rebellious, crazy 13-year-old come and live with your family. I think there needs to be a little bit of a buffer, not only for the family, but also for the kid. So I actually really appreciate that she sent me out to get better in a way. And then I moved in with her and her family, her then husband and her child. I was about 16, 17. So I went to a year of high school out in Burbank, which was really cool at a private school. But right about that time, she was going through a divorce with her husband. And it was a little chaotic here in LA, which I'd never experienced before. So we just said, okay, I'm going to go back to Florida, do my last year of high school there with kids that I knew and grew up with. And as soon as I was able to, once I graduated high school, I was right back out here in LA, and I've been here since. So,
What what do you do in LA now? I mean, are you in the business? What's your aspiration?
I'm not currently in the business, but I've definitely had little forays into it. I was Cassandra's assistant actually for about a year and a half, and that didn't work out at that time. I wasn't in the best place in the world, but we tried, and maybe someday I could work with her again. But I've been a personal assistant. I've mostly worked as an assistant. Like, I don't have a college degree, so I've just been working in administrative assistant work, gosh, since when I was still living in Florida. So um, now I'm actually a dean's assistant at a community college, and I work in the equity and inclusiveness department. So it's interesting work, and I feel like I get to really help a lot of people and learn a lot, but it's not necessarily the dream. I think I took this assistant job because I needed a job. And I've been there 10 years now, which is pretty wild to me. And they pay well, and there's great benefits. I'm technically a state employee, so there's lots of nice benefits that come along with that. But even then, to pay the bills here in Los Angeles, I almost have to have a second job. And I work as a building manager in the building I'm currently sitting in for Cassandra's ex-husband, Mark, who like I still keep in touch with. And he's, not a perfect person. And obviously Cassandra is my blood, but I do still keep in touch with Mark because they were really my parent figures. So here I am helping him out by managing this building, which he got in the divorce. Just a little 5-unit building in West Hollywood. But um, I have that as my second job and basically use the subsidized rent price for my work to be able to afford a nice apartment, because even a well-paying assistant job can barely get you a one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles. So I'm doing both of those, and I feel like all I do lately is just work and come home and watch TV. I don't have the bandwidth for anything else lately, but I am my best friend, who's from Miami and is working to get out here. He and I built a vocal booth here in my apartment because he does voiceover for a living. He does anime and a lot of dubbing for foreign shows. So he really inspired me to get into voiceover work. And I've got a booth here in my house. So we're on track to get me working, and we've already done some testing and things. So voiceover is one of my dreams. I think I don't like my regular talking voice, like I'm just speaking right now, but definitely getting into the more creative, whether it's arts or voiceover. I think that's always been a dream, and I put that on hold sort of to survive, because whether I've got a famous aunt or not, I still have to survive and kind of make my own way and prove that I can take care of myself. Definitely not a Nepo baby. So I have to make sure that I'm supporting myself first and foremost. And, I have time to pursue my dreams.
Yeah. It's funny, people think just because you're a brother or sister or a niece or nephew or related that they're automatically the doors are open, that it's an unlimited bank account. In my career, in my life, I had some wild ideas, but I had to finally prove myself, to my sister, like, hey, I want to make movies. Yeah, sure, no, whatever, Chip, But then once I started, I got sober 21 years ago, so once I kind of was able to put the feet to the pavement and kind of start doing stuff, and she goes, oh, wow, you know what, you really are doing what you said. Then it was a little different opening, and maybe that way with Cassandra, with you. But voiceover is amazing. I used to do a lot of promos and dealt with a lot of voiceover people in L.A. and New York and all around. What is your favorite type of voiceover? Are you looking to do cartoon voices? Are you looking for commercial? What's your favorite voice to do a voiceover in? Give us an example of that.
Oh, goodness. I'm still exploring really what it means to be a voiceover actor. And I think even my best friend who does voiceover for a living, I'm not sure he even understood when he got into it how much of voiceover work, especially for something like animation or anime, is so close to your real voice. Maybe you just take it up a pitch or down a pitch. And he's really stressed that voiceover work isn't about how your voice sounds or like how you speak. It's really about catching the inflections and the meaning in the lines and really conveying that in a way where, without seeing you, people are going to understand emotions. So I am open to the fact that it might just be really kind of mundane. I'm not going to be doing a lot of wacky voices or, straining my throat to do some character. But I've always, since I was a little kid, and it's probably some form of autism, I don't know, I've always echoed the sounds that I hear in the world. I've always impersonated voices that I heard. I always would, I'd watch a cartoon and then find myself talking like that character or mimicking a conversation that was had, or even just a funny sound that was in the show. So since I was little, this has always been something I enjoyed doing. But as far as my career that I'm working on in voiceover, it's hard to say where my niche would be, because I definitely can do wacky voices, and I can definitely make it real professional and smooth. But I also really kind of enjoy the range. So I'm open to anything at this point, but I'm just getting started. So
give me an example of a cartoon voice that you love to emulate, or is an original of yours.
Don't have many originals. Gosh, a lot of my impressions are outdated at this point, but I'm just trying to
I'm
think.
old, I get it.
Yeah, right. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, like I said. So, oh gosh, it takes a minute really to drop or pop up into some of these. So, trying to think.
Well, one of them, I don't know if you recognize this one, but I do like this character from a show called South Park, and his name's Butters, and uh, he's pretty shy most of the time, though. So, like me, he doesn't really like to do some wacky stuff. He gets put on the spot, and it's just a little too much for him. So we don't do that very much. Uh,
That's
you know,
amazing.
it's it takes a little bit. There's a rhythm you have to get into. So I think had I expected to,
Yeah,
to do some
no. That, you
voices
know what?
today.
That was that's it's kind of like we were having a conversation at a party, and you mentioned that. I'm like, well, dang, girl, give me a voice, So you
I
did
should
great.
put like a piece of paper up so you can just hear the voice, because I do make weird faces when I do these voices, which is part of what
That's-
voiceover is.
Absolutely. There's so much acting in voiceover. I've had to. We're pitching a reality show, and I had to do a voiceover for the sizzle reel, and like you, I hate my voice. I'm kind of dreading the podcast because of I got to listen to that. Oh my God! But I'm excited to do it. What are some of the fun things that you've been able to do? Not necessarily with Cassandra, with her, or because of, or being in the location you are, being friends with Mark. I mean, what are some of the fun, exciting Hollywood things that you've been able to experience in your life?
There's been a lot, and I often think about how strange it is, some of the situations that I've had the privilege of going into, just because Cassandra is my aunt and she is who she is. And I think anyone that lives in LA encounters celebrities and, ends up at a party with, you know, whoever. It's normal when you live in Los Angeles, because this is where we've got pretty much all the celebrities living and just having their everyday lives. But the number of celebrity encounters or special backstage things that I got without Cassandra's association, I could probably count on one hand. It's like I went to a New Year's Eve party and John Mayer was there, and we kind of said hi, nice to meet you, and that was it. That's fairly par for the course here in Los Angeles, but because of Cassandra, I have experiences like I used to babysit for Bradley Whitford, who's, from The West Wing and Get Out and Handmaid's Tale. I just remembered not more than a week ago that when I was a teenager, I went on a bike ride in the mountains with Robert Downey Jr. There's just been some really wacky experiences. Going over to drop off books at my aunt's house, and Jack White is sitting in the living room playing the piano, and then we hang out with him. Going to dinner with Todd Rundgren at a Chinese restaurant. There's so many random things that I just don't think a lot of other people, unless you are famous yourself or you're real close with someone famous, you get to have. And that really still strikes me in a lot of ways. I do sit back sometimes and think, wow, how crazy is my life sometimes. It's not like that the majority of the time. I can recall these specific instances, sitting in watching a taping of the Jay Leno show and hanging out with Jay Leno afterwards. I didn't even know who he was at the time, as I was a kid. But these aren't, these aren't experiences that most people have, I don't think. So I really appreciate them and still think it's really magical to have those. But I recognize it's not most people's experience. I think, if I was just one step removed from Cassandra, like even my own brother, he's not as close with her just because, and he hasn't gotten to have a lot of these experiences, even though we're, in the same exact relationship to her. But for whatever reason, I became close with her and she kind of latched on to me when I was really young before she had kids. So there's been a lot of really interesting things.
Yeah, I had she had invited me and my wife over to, it was her ex-manager, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was having a big party, and I started talking to Don Henley about meeting him at a record release at a recording studio in West Hollywood, and being friends with Vanna's makeup artist and this whole kind of connection. Then we walked to another room, and I think it's Joe Pantalone I think is how you say his name. I won't say I got in an argument with him, but I got in a debate about the movie he was in with my brother, who was a dancer or was a dancer in New York. It was all because of Cassandra. She'd invited us to this party, and like you said, you kind of get to be on these kind of fun skirt stories to tell, and so if we're getting close to, I try not to keep people too long.
Okay.
What is something that I kind of like? Hopefully, it's my last question, but may not be. But what is something that I didn't ask, or something you really want to share? That again, the question I didn't ask, or something you feel like, hey, I really need to share this.
You know, there's always just a myriad of things to talk about in this realm, and I think just the average person listening might be really curious, like how is their life normal? How is their life not normal if they're related to a celebrity? Because I think a lot of us put celebrities on pedestals. You know, that's the reason we line up to get their autograph. That's the reason we, watch their movies or, watch these award shows, is because we feel like they're special and they're beautiful and they're kind of in this other place and on this other level. But really, especially as like the niece of a celebrity who's not exactly A-list, she'll be the first person to say that. I think it is a pretty normal life. There are these little perks and there are these fun moments, but even Cassandra herself is super normal and super down to earth, and she's got infinite stories. You can go buy her book and read most of them, but she's a very down to earth, normal person. Like, to me, she really is just Aunt Cassandra. But I think there is a certain benefit for the average person or the relative of a celebrity, in that there's inspiration in just being around creative people, and anyone can get that in their lives, in their everyday lives. We all have friends who are creative and fun and inspiring, but I think that with me having my aunt for, being Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, there's a certain level of aspiration, and, you want to impress your parents, you want to impress your relatives, and, if you've got a famous relative, it's the same exact thing. So I want Cassandra she is like my mother, I'd say more than my actual mother, and who passed away, and Cassandra's all I've really got now. So I want to make her proud every day, and I also got sober about 8 years ago, and man, what a difference that made in our relationship, because she was so terrified of what was going to happen to me because I just couldn't get my life together. And by the grace of the universe or whatever, my brother and I both got sober, and that's something our parents couldn't do. And Cassandra watched both of her sisters die from alcoholism and addiction, and to have her niece and nephew be sober now, I think means a lot to her. So I'm feeling support and love from her again, in a way that she had to withhold for a little while because she was so scared and sad for us,
Yeah, I do. And congratulations. That 8 years it's funny how fast it goes sometimes.
It does.
Okay, so you did bring up another point for me, is that when I was not in my best world with my sister, my family, I wouldn't say that she was an enabler, but she, I think a lot of times they tend to turn a blind eye to kind of hope you're going to be different. And like you said, now you want to make her proud. That's the same with me with my sister. Yeah. And people say, well, you're using the coattails to do this podcast. It's like, look, bottom line is we're related, and that's just it. You're related to Cassandra. That's just it. What was it like during that period when she was really worried, and kind of like you said, now it's a little different? Do you feel and see a difference in your relationship? That makes sense?
It does. And, it is very different from even before I went off the rails. We were still very close, and I got to do a lot of fun things with her, and she included me, and she even tried to hire me. But I think that underlying worry was always there because she saw me going out with my friends and partying and having rough days afterward and, struggling in that way. And I know in the back of her mind, because she had watched both of her sisters and several uncles and, people go down this path, and she knew what it led to, right? So that was always in the back of her mind, watching me seemingly out just having a good time. I think she knew better. And I was young. I mean, well, youngish. I was probably in my mid to late 20s by this point. I didn't get sober until I was in my early 30s. So I just kind of thought I would get over it and I'd be fine because I wasn't my mother, right? But my aunt had been through this with my mother, with her other sister, with uncles, and she, I think, was in some of those early cases where she's seeing somebody so close to her go through this incredible struggle and, heading towards death, basically. She did try everything to help them. And I know she spent a lot of money trying to help my mom and get her to go to a treatment center or therapy or this or that. And then she realized at a certain point, you can't force someone, they have to want it, right? So when it came my turn to have her part of my life while I was going through this struggle, she was very clear that she loved me and supported me and wanted the best for me, but she wasn't going to help me unless I was willing to help myself. And I pretty much, took that to heart and did it on my own. And my brother did the same. And we got through it. It was rough. And there was a long time where I didn't know if she was ever going to trust me or invite me to anything ever again. But after a few years, and she saw that I was actually doing the dance and really meaning it, we're closer than ever.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
And I know I have probably some really specific fun things that have happened or people I've met with my sister. What is the one thing that you still to this day go, oh my God, because I was with Cassandra at this moment, this happened? Is there something that really is like, it's kind of like the top of your celebrity checklist, so to speak?
I mentioned some of my favorites earlier, having
Okay.
Bradley Whitford and Jane Kasmerick living across the street. And this is the silliest one. I didn't mention it earlier, but this is one of my favorites. I was getting out of the car after school one day, and we're parked on the street in front because I think like the nanny or somebody had picked us up from school. And I say us, myself and Cassandra's child. I was older, but we're getting out of the car and we're parked on the street. And I swung the door open to get a backpack or something out of the back. And I hear a car pull up and kind of stop because they couldn't get around because the door was open too wide. And I went, oh no, I better get out and shut the door. And I get out, shut the door, and look up, and there's Brad Pitt just waving, like, oh, thanks, because he lived next door. And it's like,
That's a good one.
It's a silly one, but it's like, hey, that, I live on the same street as Brad Pitt. How wild.
Yeah. I had gone to a New Year's Eve party with Vanna early in Will when it was kind of really peaking, and Gene Kelly was there. And, a lot of these young kids don't know who he is, but man, I was a huge fan of his dancing in movies and stuff. And I actually went up and talked to him for a little while. And that's kind of the thing that really, of all the people I've met and the crazy thing I've done, I still remember, man, I got to meet Gene Kelly.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly appreciate your time today. Didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, no. I was going to just tease that there's 100 more random people I met at parties that I would love to tell you about sometime. So we'll chat more.
We will. You know what? We will have you as a guest again later. Hopefully, at some point, I'd like to have the guest and their relative, and kind of have a little three conversation as the podcast progresses. We'll see. But
all right.
But Paige, I'm grateful that you were with us today. It's terrific to have you. And please, please, please tell Cassandra that I said hey and thank you for connecting us. That was super kind of her. And we will chat again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Paige.
Thank you.
We're going to do, okay. We're going to do the close now. I sincerely want to thank Paige for being our guest today. And again, her aunt Elvira is a super, super great person. I love Elvira, Cassandra. I want to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in today. Whether you stumbled across us, or you're a subscriber, or you just happen to be told about this, I'm extremely grateful and humble that you would take the time to spend with us today. I'd like to thank our partner, Nelco Media, for making this happen. Otherwise, I'd be sitting at home twiddling my thumbs going, I wonder if I could do a podcast. And I hope that you will continue to join us. If you are famous, or you know someone famous, or you happen to be a relative of someone famous, and you might want to be a guest, reach out to us. We would love to have you on the show. Thank you.
You've been listening to Relatively Famous with Chip White. Please like and subscribe to Relatively Famous with Chip White.